I think one of the things that you're saying is that maybe going all the way back to the Umayyad dynasty in the very first centuries after Islam, you had the establishment of these Islamic states, which obviously had their own leaders, who were you generally, by the way, not clergy. They were emperors. The Abbasid dynasty, later the Mamluks, and so many others, the Ottomans. But this created a new phenomenon, which was in a way following the state's mandate. Iraq is at war with Iran, or Turkey is launching an expedition against the Arabs in the Middle East. And I think what you're saying is that that is kind of outside the orbit of Islam. There's no mandate here that you have to sort of that the leader of a country necessarily gets to speak for Islam. I'd like to ask you if that's correct. And then I want to ask you a second point, which is, do you regard the Islamic expansion then, which occurred between the 7th century, really all the way until the Muslims conquered most of Syria, Jordan, those parts of the world. They went south into Africa. They conquered parts of India. The Mughals were in charge of North India. They were at the gates of Vienna. They ruled Spain for hundreds of years. I mean, were those... I don't think it's fair to call all those defensive battles. How could you? Are those illegitimate in terms of your understanding of Islamic history?
Yeah, anyone who wants to cheat you in an interview will tell you Islam according to me, Islam according to my understanding. Well, I'm not here to talk about my understanding. I'll tell you what exactly Islam is. I want to go back first before the conquest, speak about the Umayyads. Dinesh, you see, before the Umayyads, we had caliphs. The Umayyad period is when we went from caliphs to kings. That's
Right.
why it made sense for you to bring up the issue of the state. The Prophet Muhammad never had a state. There was no Islamic government in the time of the Prophet. Even by today's minimum standards, what makes a state? If I were to ask you now, what makes a state? A head of state, an economy, and a military. These are the basic two wings for you to function. Even today, some countries don't even have the military. They say we don't need it. We haven't had wars in so many years. So you need a basic economy. But at the time, military was a fundamental pillar of a state. And even is now for many countries. Look at America. But all the other ministries of sport, of health, media, these are not vital. So without them, a government can still exist. Now, at the time of the Prophet, we never had an economy. We had a Baytul Mal, a treasury that the Prophet, from his piety and care for the poor, would empty it every single night and feed the poor with it. So we never had an economy. And we never had a military in Mecca. It was the same Muslims who would train their children. And whenever there was a need to defend themselves, they would gather and go out to defend themselves in battle. So there was no separate military that like we have now in Iran, for example, in the militias. And so there's the IRGC and then there's the army, right? This never existed in the time of the Prophet. So to say that today's Islamist dictatorships like the regime occupying Iran is in any way an inheritor of the Prophet, which by the way is what's written on the podium when Khamenei speaks, is an absolute lie. Coming to conquests, now I will go back to the point that we went from caliphs to kings, but again, what makes anything legitimate in Islam, whether it be a teaching or an act, it is if it is sanctioned by the Prophet and the Quran. Nowhere do we have, just look at, for example, the movements of our Prophet from Mecca to Medina and then back to Mecca. Mecca was not a conquest. Before we get into Africa and Asia and Europe, Mecca was not a conquest. The Prophet himself is from the tribe of Quraysh, and Quraysh were rulers of Mecca. Quraysh was at war with the Prophet. They tried to assassinate him in his bed while he slept. And therefore, in an act of self-defense, he returned, and the ruling tribe, Quraysh, submitted to the Prophet, and therefore not a single person was killed when he entered Mecca. So to call it a conquest is very wrong, because by tribal law, the tribe submitted to him as the head of the tribe, as the chief of the tribe, and he's indigenous to the land. It belongs to him. And he returned and he claimed it. And then people adhered to his message. So there was no conquest. The Prophet never had any conquests, is what the point, what I want to say. Even the whole idea of the Prophet sending Osama, a young boy, 16-year-old, Osama bin Zayd, to go and fight the Romans in Jerusalem. While he was in his deathbed, the Prophet had promised that he was going to avenge Zayd, whom the Romans had killed. So he sent Osama, the son of Zayd, to lead an army. They went outside of the city, and then they heard that the Prophet had passed away. They made the U-turn and returned. So there was no conquest ever sanctioned by the Prophet. What happened afterwards is now a divide between the Sunni theology doctrine and Shia doctrine, and the Sunnis believe that the Caliph can do whatever he likes.
The administration has their sleeves rolled up in streamlining monumental moves right now. However, it's difficult for them to take your personal finances or mine into account when trying to do what's right for the country. Well, you have to do that, I have to do that, and this is why tens of thousands of us are buying gold from Birch Gold. Here are some facts. In the past 12 months, the value of gold has gone up, has increased by 40%. Some central banks bolster demand for gold by buying in record quantities. Global instability and tension is among the highest in decades. But you might be able to find security, find peace of mind in gold. Birch Gold makes it easy for you to convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. Or you can just buy some gold to store at home. Text my name Dinesh to 989898. Birch Gold will send you a free information kit on gold. There's no obligation, just useful information. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Tens of thousands of happy customers. Protect your savings today. Get started. Text the word Dinesh to 989898.